She thought she was untouchable, until the restaurant's owner stepped in with a lesson money couldn't buy. The evening rush at Donovan's, a high-end restaurant in San Diego, was in full swing. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the polished wooden tables, each adorned with white linen and gleaming silverware. Waiters moved with precision, balancing trays of exquisitely plated meals, their footsteps soft against the marble floor. Among the crowd of diners was a group of 3 women seated at the center of the room, their laughter carrying over the gentle hum of conversations. At the head of the group sat Evelyn Monroe, a woman whose presence demanded attention. Evelyn wasn't just wealthy, she exuded it. Her diamond necklace sparkled as brightly as her watch, which peeked out from beneath the cuff of her tailored blazer. With a perfectly manicured hand, she sipped from her glass of wine, her eyes scanning the room as though deciding whether it met her standards. To Evelyn, everything had a hierarchy, and tonight she was perched firmly at the top. At the far end of the room, a waitress, young with an air of nervous energy, was weaving through the maze of tables. Her name tag read Emily, though it was barely visible against the dark fabric of her uniform. Emily had been working double shifts for weeks, saving every penny for college. But tonight, her exhaustion was evident in the way she stumbled slightly while setting down a tray of glasses. Evelyn noticed. Her lips curled into a faint smirk. To her, people like Emily were invisible until they weren't, until they made a mistake. The evening took a sharp turn when Emily arrived at Evelyn's table. Setting down their entrees, she murmured, "Here you are, ladies. I hope you enjoy your meals." Her voice trembled slightly, but her politeness was unwavering. Evelyn raised a single brow, inspecting the plate in front of her. "Excuse me," she said, her tone cutting through the air like a knife. "Is this supposed to be medium rare? It looks closer to well done. And why is it taking so long? We've been waiting for what feels like forever." Emily blinked, caught off guard. I'm so sorry, ma'am. Let me take this back and—" "Oh, spare me the apology," Evelyn interrupted. Her friends exchanged amused glances, clearly enjoying the show. "Honestly, it's not that hard to get an order right. Or is it?" Emily's cheeks flushed a deep red. The room seemed to hold its breath for a moment, the tension palpable. But in the corner of the room, a man in a simple grey suit sat quietly watching. His expression gave away nothing, but his gaze didn't waver. But the moment was far from over, and what happened next would change everything. Emily's hands trembled as she carefully lifted Evelyn's plate from the table. She nodded politely, murmuring, "I'll have this fixed right away," and turned to head toward the kitchen. But Evelyn wasn't finished. "Unbelievable," Evelyn muttered, her voice loud enough for the tables around her to hear. "They hire anyone these days, don't they? I mean, how hard is it to carry a plate of food without looking like you're going to drop it?" Laughter erupted from her friends. Evelyn leaned back in her chair, clearly enjoying the attention. "It's like she thinks a smile and a stammer will earn her a tip. Honestly, I should report her for ruining the entire evening." At the kitchen door, Emily hesitated, her grip tightening around the plate. Her face burned, and she could feel tears welling in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She'd dealt with rude customers before. This wasn't new. But something about Evelyn's cold, deliberate cruelty cut deeper than she expected. From his table in the corner, the man in the grey suit observed the entire scene. His face remained impassive, but his fingers tapped lightly against the edge of his glass. His movements were slow and deliberate, as though he were considering every detail of what he'd just witnessed. Back at Evelyn's table, the complaints continued. "And did you see how she walked?" Evelyn scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Like she was barely holding it together. If she can't handle working in a place like this, she should find a job that suits her level, like flipping burgers." The surrounding diners were growing visibly uncomfortable. Some whispered to their companions, others glanced toward Evelyn's table with disapproval. One couple sitting nearby even exchanged a look before shaking their heads in silent agreement. But Evelyn was oblivious, or perhaps she didn't care. Emily returned moments later, carrying a fresh plate of food. She placed it down in front of Evelyn with as much composure as she could muster. "Here you are, Ma'am. I had the chef remake it for you. I hope this meets your expectations." Evelyn gave the plate a cursory glance before shrugging. "I suppose it'll do," she said, her tone dismissive. "But next time, try to get it right the first time. And for heaven's sake, learn how to carry yourself. You represent this establishment, and quite frankly, you're doing a terrible job of it." Emily forced a smile, her voice barely above a whisper. "Of course, Ma'am. I'll do my best." As Emily walked away, Evelyn turned back to her friends, grinning. It's amazing how people can be so incompetent, yet still think they deserve respect. At that moment, the man in the corner stood up. His movements were calm, almost calculated, as he made his way toward the restaurant's manager, who had been hovering near the bar. He leaned in close, speaking in a low voice, and the manager's eyes widened slightly. Evelyn, meanwhile, continued her conversation, unaware that her evening was about to take an unexpected turn. But the man wasn't just any diner, and his quiet intervention was about to shake the room. The manager, a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair and a no-nonsense demeanor, nodded respectfully as the man in the grey suit spoke. It was a quiet exchange, but those seated nearby noticed the subtle shift in the manager's expression, from curiosity to something more serious. After the brief conversation, the man returned to his table, his steps deliberate and calm. Meanwhile, Evelyn had moved on to another topic, regaling her friends with stories of her recent vacation. "Oh, the Maldives were stunning," she said, twirling the stem of her wineglass. "You wouldn't believe how exquisite the private villas were. And the staff? Flawless, unlike what we've seen here tonight." Her words were punctuated with a smirk, and her friends giggled in agreement. Across the room, Emily was quietly restocking trays of glasses, her hands still trembling. She avoided looking in Evelyn's direction, focusing instead on her task. She had perfected the art of compartmentalizing her emotions during shifts, but tonight it felt nearly impossible. It wasn't until Evelyn and her friends requested the check that the atmosphere in the restaurant began to shift. The manager himself approached their table, accompanied by Emily. He carried a tray with a bottle of champagne and an envelope. Evelyn's eyebrow arched in confusion, though a trace of smugness lingered on her face. "Ladies," the manager began, his voice steady and professional. "Compliments of the house." Evelyn's friends gasped in delight, and one of them clapped her hands together. "Oh, how lovely." Evelyn leaned back in her chair, clearly pleased. "Well, it's about time someone recognized exceptional patrons," she said, shooting Emily a pointed glance. But the manager's next words silenced the table. "This gesture comes directly from the owner of Donovan's," he said, placing the envelope in front of Evelyn. "He's been observing your experience tonight and wanted to personally address it." Evelyn's smile faltered. "The owner?" she repeated, her voice tinged with surprise. Before the manager could respond, the man in the grey suit approached their table. The room fell silent as diners turned to watch. He stood there, his posture relaxed but commanding, and offered a polite smile. "Yes, the owner," he said, his voice calm but firm. "My name is Charles Donovan, and this is my restaurant." Evelyn's jaw tightened, her cheeks flushing slightly. "Oh, Mr. Donovan, I didn't realize." She trailed off, clearly scrambling for words. Charles gestured toward Emily, who stood quietly to the side, her gaze fixed on the floor. "Emily here happens to be my niece," he said, his tone still even. "She's one of the hardest working people I know, and I take great pride in having her as part of my team." The color drained from Evelyn's face. Her friends exchanged uneasy glances, their earlier laughter replaced by an awkward silence. Charles didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "I couldn't help but overhear the way you spoke to her tonight," he continued, And while I understand that mistakes happen, I believe there's a way to handle them, with respect and kindness." Evelyn fumbled for a response, but before she could say anything, Charles leaned in slightly, his calm demeanor unyielding. "Money might buy you luxury, but it doesn't entitle you to belittle those who work to provide it," he said, his words cutting through the silence like a knife. But his message wasn't just for Evelyn, it was for everyone in the room, and the weight of it hung in the air. The room was utterly silent, every diner frozen in place, hanging on Charles's words. Evelyn, who moments ago radiated superiority, now sat stiffly, her confidence visibly shaken. Her fingers fidgeted with the stem of her wineglass, her carefully composed demeanor crumbling under the weight of the moment. Charles straightened, his eyes sweeping over Evelyn's friends, then the rest of the restaurant. "Respect is the foundation of this establishment," he said, his voice resonating throughout the room. "Not just respect for the food we serve, but for the people who make it possible. The chefs, the servers, the dishwashers. Every single one of them is integral to what you all enjoy here tonight." Evelyn opened her mouth as though to respond, but no words came. Instead, one of her friends shifted uncomfortably, breaking the tension. "I'm sure Evelyn didn't mean any harm," the woman offered weakly, her voice barely above a whisper. Charles tilted his head slightly, his gaze unflinching. "Perhaps not," he said, his tone measured. "But intent doesn't erase impact. Words have power, and when they're wielded carelessly, they can leave lasting damage." He turned to Emily, who had been standing off to the side, her face a mix of embarrassment and quiet gratitude. "Emily, you handled yourself with professionalism and grace tonight, even under unfair scrutiny. I want you to know how proud I am of you." Emily blinked back tears, nodding slightly. She didn't trust her voice enough to speak, but her gratitude was palpable. Charles then shifted his focus back to Evelyn. "Now, as for you," he said, his tone losing none of its civility, "I could ask you to leave and not return. But I believe there's a better lesson to be learned here." Evelyn's eyes widened slightly, and her friends exchanged worried glances. Charles gestured toward the champagne bottle the manager had brought over earlier. "This was meant to be a gesture of goodwill," he explained. "But instead, I'll be donating its value, and your entire tab, to a local organization that supports young women like Emily, who are working hard to build a better future for themselves." Murmurs rippled through the restaurant. Some diners nodded in approval, others exchanged glances of surprise. Evelyn finally found her voice, though it wavered. "Mr. Donovan, I think this is a bit extreme. I didn't mean to—" Charles held up a hand, silencing her gently but firmly. "This isn't about punishment, Mrs. Monroe. It's about accountability. And I hope this moment gives you an opportunity to reflect on the kind of legacy you want to leave behind." His words were calm, but they carried an undeniable weight. Evelyn looked down at her hands, avoiding his gaze. Her friends sat in uneasy silence, clearly unsure how to respond. Charles took a step back, addressing the room once more. "Let tonight serve as a reminder to us all," he said. "Kindness costs nothing, but it can mean everything. You never know what someone is carrying or who might be watching." The room erupted into soft applause. It wasn't raucous or dramatic, but it was genuine. Patrons nodded in agreement, some even smiling at Emily as if to silently show their support. Evelyn, however, sat frozen in her seat, her earlier bravado reduced to silence. She wasn't used to being challenged, much less in public, and the experience left her visibly shaken. Charles turned back to Emily. "Take a short break," he said gently. "You've earned it." Emily hesitated, then nodded, slipping away toward the back of the restaurant. As she disappeared through the kitchen doors, her posture seemed a little straighter, her steps a little lighter. But the lesson didn't end there. The ripples of this moment would carry far beyond the walls of Donovan's. The evening at Donovan's slowly returned to its usual rhythm, but something had shifted in the air. Patrons whispered to one another, not about the food or the decor, but about what they had just witnessed. The quiet man in the grey suit had reminded them of something profound. Decency and respect weren't just virtues, they were essential. Evelyn remained at her table, uncharacteristically silent. Her friends awkwardly exchanged glances, unsure of how to proceed. They avoided addressing the moment directly, but the discomfort was written on their faces. Evelyn stared at her untouched plate, the taste of humiliation stronger than any meal she could have ordered. At the back of the restaurant, Emily leaned against the wall near the kitchen, taking deep breaths to steady herself. Her manager approached her with a warm smile. "You handled yourself beautifully tonight," he said. "Not many could have stayed so composed." Emily nodded, her voice soft but steady. "Thank you," she replied. "I didn't think anyone noticed." "They noticed," the manager assured her, "especially Mr. Donovan." In the dining area, Charles Donovan returned to his seat, casually sipping from his glass of water as if nothing extraordinary had happened. A few patrons passed by his table on their way out, offering polite nods or quiet words of appreciation. One diner, an older gentleman, stopped briefly. "You don't see people stand up like that often anymore," he said. "That was something special." Charles smiled faintly. It wasn't about standing up. It was about reminding everyone, myself included, that kindness is the least we can offer each other. As Evelyn and her friends rose to leave, she avoided looking at anyone directly. Her cheeks were still flushed, her confident stride reduced to a tentative shuffle. At the door, she paused, glancing back at the room she had once commanded. For the first time, she seemed smaller, quieter, less sure of herself. The staff and diners didn't look at her with pity or disdain. Instead, there was a shared understanding, a collective hope that maybe, just maybe, she'd walk away from this moment a little different. Outside, the night air was crisp, and Evelyn paused on the sidewalk. Her friends tried to console her, offering platitudes that rang hollow, but she waved them off, saying she needed a moment. Meanwhile, inside Donovan's, Emily returned to the floor with a newfound confidence. She moved between tables, smiling warmly at patrons who now saw her not just as a waitress, but as a young woman with strength and dignity. The night ended quietly, but the lesson lingered long after the doors closed. Some patrons left bigger tips than usual. Others exchanged kind words with staff they might have overlooked before. And Evelyn? She walked away humbled. Her world shifted in a way she never anticipated. Charles watched from the window as the last guests departed. He didn't smile, didn't gloat. He simply sat there, satisfied that a small but important point had been made. Because at the end of the day, it's not about wealth, status, or power. It's about how you treat the people who cross your path, no matter where they come from or who they are. And maybe, if we all remembered that, the world would feel a little kinder. If this story resonated with you, share it with someone who might need a reminder about the power of kindness. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that inspire reflection and change.